In 221 BCE, the king of Qin ended a war that had lasted for generations. 6 rival states had been defeated, and one government now claimed authority over nearly all of the Chinese world. Yingzheng took a new title, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He could order roads to be built, laws to be changed, measurements to be standardized, and entire populations to move. But one enemy ignored every order he gave: death. In his final years, officials searched the empire for medicines of immortality. Ships sailed east in search of legendary islands. At the same time, a vast tomb was taking shape beneath the ground. Why did conquering China lead its first emperor into a search for eternal life? Fear of death was not unusual. In Qin Shi Huang's case, however, death also carried immediate political consequences. He had survived violent court struggles and assassination attempts. He had watched kingdoms disappear after their rulers were defeated. The new empire was now centered on his own authority. If he died, the court would have to settle the succession. Princes and officials would begin making decisions before his commands could reach them. Policies he had imposed could be changed by people he could no longer supervise. None of this proves exactly what he felt in private, but his actions suggest that death was more than a threat to his body. It was also a limit on his power. He had answered resistance with armies, laws, roads, inspections, and administrative orders. He began to approach mortality in much the same way, as a problem that could be investigated, organized, and perhaps overcome. Stories of immortals, sacred mountains, and life-extending medicines already circulated in Qin Shi Huang's world. Figures later described as Fangshi claimed special knowledge of rituals, omens, medicines, and unusual forces in nature. The boundaries between medicine, religion, cosmology, and state ritual were not the boundaries a modern viewer would draw. A claim that sounds plainly supernatural today could still be presented at court as a question worth testing. Qin Shi Huang did not have to accept every story. The possibility that one might be true may have been enough. He also had resources that most seekers did not: officials, roads, ships, labor, supplies, and the authority to use them. No one could prove that the islands of the Immortals existed, but no one could easily prove that they did not. For an emperor able to fund years of searching, uncertainty was not a reason to stop. It was a reason to keep looking. Wooden administrative slips from the Qin period preserve evidence that the search moved beyond private court discussion. An imperial order required local officials to look for an elixir of immortality and report what they found, or explain why they had found nothing. Messengers carried the order along imperial roads. Clerks copied it. Local administrators questioned specialists and searched the areas under their control. A private fear had become government work. The search also moved east. Ancient historical accounts associate a court figure named Su Fu with expeditions sent toward legendary islands to seek immortals and their medicine. The decision contained a problem the emperor's authority could not remove. Refusing such a proposal might mean losing the only genuine chance for immortality. Approving it meant giving ships, supplies, workers, and time to someone who might be wrong or dishonest. Absolute power could send ships. It could not tell him whether the promise was true. When an expedition returned without the medicine, the claim did not have to disappear. Perhaps the search had reached the wrong island. Perhaps a ritual had been incomplete. Perhaps more time or a larger expedition was needed. Once officials had been sent and reports had begun moving through the court, ending the search also meant admitting that an imperial order had produced no result. For a local official or court specialist, it was usually safer to request more time than to tell the first emperor that the thing he wanted most might not exist. This did not require every person involved to be part of a single deception. Bureaucracies often shape information before it reaches the ruler, especially when bad news carries personal risk. The search could therefore continue without clear evidence. Each failure generated another explanation, another report, and another reason to try again. Ancient attempts to extend life sometimes used minerals and other substances that modern medicine recognizes as toxic. Mercury became closely associated with later Chinese alchemical traditions, and later accounts have connected Qin Shi Huang's search with dangerous elixirs. The exact cause of his death is unknown. It would be misleading to say that an immortality pill certainly killed him. Still, some mineral substances may have appeared attractive precisely because they did not decay like flesh. They seemed stable, unusual, and capable of transformation. The problem was practical. A substance that resisted decay could still poison a living body. While physicians in Fangshi searched for a body that would not fail, a vast labor force was already preparing the place where the emperor's body would be buried. Work on Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum began while he was still a young king and continued until his death. It was not simply a chamber built to hold a body. Around the burial mound, archaeologists have found pits containing soldiers, horses, chariots, officials, entertainers, animals, and weapons. The arrangement reproduced parts of the political and military world the emperor had ruled above ground. The central burial chamber remains unopened. Sima Qian, writing more than a century later, described palaces, treasures, mechanical defenses, and rivers of mercury representing the waterways of the empire. Those details have not all been verified. The wider complex is clearer. It provided the emperor with an army, attendants, transport, administration, and a carefully organized space after death. This was not necessarily a contradiction. A ruler could hope to avoid death and still prepare for it. Above ground, Qin Shi Huang searched for a way to remain alive. Below ground, he prepared to remain emperor. In 210 BCE, Qin Shi Huang became seriously ill during an imperial tour far from the capital. Sima Qian writes that the emperor disliked discussion of death so strongly that ministers were afraid to raise the subject. When he died on the journey, the people around him feared the political consequences of announcing it immediately. According to the account, the death was concealed during the return. Reports continued to be delivered to the imperial carriage. Food was still presented at the curtain as if the emperor were alive. From outside, the procession continued to operate. Inside, the man whose approval had organized the system could no longer respond. The secrecy bought time, but not stability. The succession was manipulated, senior officials pursued their own interests, and rebellion spread across the empire. By 206 BCE, Qin rule had ended. We cannot know exactly what Qin Shi Huang felt. The surviving accounts were written later and reflect the political judgments of their authors, but his actions suggest that death threatened more than his body. Once he was gone, he could no longer choose the heir, direct the court, inspect the provinces, or protect the system he had built. The search for immortality and the construction of the mausoleum were two practical responses to that problem. One tried to keep him in the world of the living. The other prepared an imperial court for whatever came after it. Neither preserved his rule. Qin Shi Huang died, and the dynasty he founded soon disappeared. More than 2,000 years later, however, people still enter the pits around his tomb and look across rows of terracotta soldiers. The empire he tried to carry beyond death vanished. The army he buried for it is still standing.